Hey guys, Philip Leibel here with Primitive Wilderness Survival, and today I want to show you how to make a Cherokee style hunting point. So stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the Cherokee actually had two different types of points. They had one they used for warfare and one they used for hunting. So if you look at these arrows, they look really similar, but this one actually has a base, it has notches, whereas this one is just a triangular point that has wrapping below it and it's just glued into place. So the reason for this, they would use these triangular points for warfare. So if you got shot with one of these and you go to pull that arrow out, this arrowhead is going to come loose and actually stay inside your body. So now you have a foreign object inside your body, which is really not a good idea. Whereas these hunting arrows, they were notched and then the sinew wrapped all the way up and actually tied this arrowhead on. So if you were shot with this thing and went to pull it out, the arrowhead should come out as well. So they secure the arrowheads a little bit better with these corner notches for hunting points, and then for warfare they were a little more crude, and it's kind of messed up, but you know they had to do what you had to do. So those are the two different types of points, and in this video we're actually gonna, basically the only difference is we're adding notches. So we're gonna make a triangular point, and if you want to use that style point, you can just stop there. But then we're going to go ahead and notch it and make this hunting point. So let's talk a little bit about the toolkit we're going to be using to make these points. This is all primitive. So this is stuff that the Cherokee would have had access to. So I just have a little woven bag here that I keep my flint knapping kit inside. And then we're going to have a rock. This is a small hammerstone. I have a lot of larger hammerstone as well, but I'm not going to need it for this project. We'll also have a moose antler. Now, the Cherokee wouldn't have had much access to moose antler billets, but they definitely would have had access to elk antlers. So it would be just a little bit smaller, but really similar to what we have here. And then this is kind of a modern take on a primitive idea, but it's an antler pressure flaker, and then all we've done is drilled this out, which you could do primitively. Drilled this out and then put another flaker inside there. So I have a couple different sizes here, and I can actually grind this down. So I can pull that out and then flip it around, and I have kind of two different size and shape points I can nap with there. And then the last thing I have is just a piece of bison rib that I've ground down really thin. And this is great for doing notches and putting the serrations on our points. So this is actually a piece of bison rib from the second bison that I hunted with the Cherokee bow. And I wanted to use as much of that animal as possible, so I just kind of repurposed one of these rib bones into a really nice notching tool. Cherokee also wouldn't have had much access to obsidian, which is what these points are made out of. And it's a really great material, makes really great hunting points, but the Cherokee wouldn't have had much access to that. Not to say that it was impossible they would have come in contact with it, but not very likely, and definitely not something that would be common. But they would have access to a lot of different types of flint or chert. So that's what we're going to use today, is just this piece of chert. And this is actually a piece of rock. I didn't knock these flakes off. These flakes were knocked off a long time ago by someone other than me. But we're going to use this, knock a flake off here, and then make our arrowhead. Now, the first thing I want to do is find a good platform, a good area on this rock I can knock a flake off of. So when I'm looking for a platform, it's just going to be any edge less than 90 degrees. And there's just a flake to get started with. All right, so I'm going to start just by cleaning this edge up some, doling it just a little bit so I don't cut myself. So I'm just taking my rock on these really sharp edges and doling that down. Now I want to get rid of my most problematic areas first. So I'm going to look around on this rock, and you can see here that this is going to be our thickest, most problematic area. So that's actually where I knocked this flake off. But I want to thin that down as quickly as I can. Now, I always attack the biggest problem areas first, and I'm much more aggressive kind of out of the gate. That way, if I mess it up early on, I haven't wasted too much time. So really, what I'm doing here is just trying to create a platform where I can quickly remove a lot of this mass. Now I'm going to take my pressure flaker and clean this platform up a little bit. So now I have a nice bevel there where I can knock a good flake off of there. We're starting to remove a lot of that mass. And now I want to start figuring out kind of how my point's going to be laid out in here. So most of my mass is in here. So I'm probably going to lay this out so this is my base, this is my point, make that into a triangle, and then I have a little more room to work that mass down as I go, and this is already thinned out on the base there. So I'm going to go ahead and start shaping that, and a lot of times I just use my billet to do what I call scrunching. So on a flake like this, when it's nice and thin, I can get away with scrunching that because I'm not too worried about making that thicker. I can easily, thin out that little bit with just my pressure flaker. So I'll start creating that base, and then on this thinner side here, I'll do the same thing and kind of scrunch and start bringing that into a triangle. So now this can be worked down with my pressure flaker, and I think most of this mass can be worked down with my pressure flaker as well. So I want to start at the thickest area first and try to thin that out if possible. So I'm just going to keep working back and forth on both these sides and start to bring this into a triangular shape while I'm reducing the thickness of this point. Now, if you want a more thorough video on the actual techniques here, I have some other flint knapping videos that go more in depth in the physics of what it is I'm doing. But we're starting to bring that into a triangle. So once I've worked all the way down both sides here to where my platform is closer to the other side, I'm actually going to flip this over abrade that a little bit, and then work this other side to try to flatten this point out a little better. So if you look, I've napped this side. Now I'm going to flip this edge and then start working into this bottom side, which hasn't been flaked yet. And that's going to flatten this point out and get rid of that curvature. Now, if I have an area that has a little more curvature, I might pay a little more attention to that area and go back over that one specific spot to flatten that out a little more, and then come back and try to keep things even. But like down here is a little more curved, so I'm going to go back and remove some more material there, and then from there, once it gets flattened out, I'll try to keep that point nice and even. So now we're getting it kind of flattened out. We still have a lot of work to do, but it's starting to flatten out, so there's no weird curvature. It's starting to turn into a triangle. So we're just going to keep working on both of those things. Make sure we're keeping it flat, and while doing so, try to work it down into a nice triangle at the same time. That's not what I'm after, but I think we can still fix that. Now this is, as far as chert goes, this is a pretty tough rock. It's kind of dry. It's kind of chalky almost. It's not, this probably needs to be heat treated. It's not quite as glass-like as I would normally like, but it's going to be a really nice, durable point, and it's going to get the job done just fine. There have been lots of animals killed with points that modern nappers would probably discard. And lots of ugly points that have put lots of food on the table for thousands of years. But in today's society, a lot of times flint napping is more just an art form, which I like to do nice work and be proud of my stuff as well. But at the end of the day, if it's about putting food on the table, the deer don't care too much what your point looks like. So this is starting to get worked down into a nice triangle. It's starting to flatten out. At this point, it gets kind of repetitive. So what I'll do is I'll nap one side with my pressure flaker, and then once I have it thin and flat and kind of the shape I want, I'll just nap one side, and then I'll take my antler and I'll kind of scrunch that. I'm not putting a lot of pressure, but I'm just kind of scrunching that. So what I'm doing is I'm streamlining that edge, and at the same time I'm removing small flakes down here and bringing this edge up and abrading it all at the same time, so I can just flip this over and nap this other edge, pressure flake this other edge. So now I've kind of turned that edge and come back, and I just keep going back and forth doing the same thing once I've gotten rid of all my problem areas, until I get this the size and shape and thickness I want. So once I get to this stage, this thing is basically just on a downward run. I'm just finishing it up. But by using this scrunching technique, so when I say scrunching, what I mean is I'll take the edge of my antler, so I have basically a flat surface here, and I'll scrunch it on the edge of this point, and that's giving me a straight line, but it's also knocking little flakes down, abrading this all at the same time and bringing that platform closer to this edge, so when I flip it over, I can just pressure flake across this edge again, and it's basically making this the shape I want, keeping it nice and streamlined, and doing all of that at the same time. So I'm a big fan of that scrunching technique. Now, when I'm pressure flaking, if I have one point, one spot of this antler, of this point that is much lower, I hit the low spot first, and then I'll hit the next lowest spot, and then the next lowest spot, and I'll work my way up until that's nice and flat. And by hitting the lowest spot, that material is going to want to turn loose a little easier because there's less material around it trying to hold on to it. So this is getting nice and sharp and starting to look like something. So again, it's kind of repetitive, but I'm just going to go back and forth doing that. And I only have probably one more time on each side, and this is going to be a nice streamlined triangular point. And then this base just needs a couple flakes knocked off. To flatten it out on the back side. So after going back and forth with the scrunching and the pressure flaking, you should be able to end up with a nice streamlined, somewhat thin and flat triangular point. Now this point is far from perfect, but this would be pretty similar to something you would find around a Cherokee campsite. So it's just a nice triangular point. So at this point, if you wanted to stop here, that would be fine. You could just glue this thing in, just like we did with this one, and you could hunt with this. But we're going to go ahead and add some notches to this and make that hafting, that connection to the arrow shaft, just that much stronger. So really, with a corner notch, it's pretty easy. Okay, so normally when I do corner notches, what I'll do is I'll actually take my pressure flaker, knock off the corners, and then I'll take my notching tool and work up into that at about a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to support this, knock that corner off at roughly a 45-degree angle, flip this over, do the same on the other side. Try to keep those pretty even. So I just start by knocking the corners off, and then I'll take off a flake right here to try to thin that out. Do the same on the other side. And then I'll switch to my notching tool. And what I'm doing is I'm flipping back and forth. So if I remove a flake in this notch here, I'm gonna do the same here, and then I'm gonna flip it over. So I'm not gonna work on one side too much. I want to make sure that I'm going back and forth so that I can keep removing material, so I can keep a platform. Okay, so I knocked a flake off on both of these on that side, and I'm going to flip it over. And when it does what you want, you'll get these nice little kind of clamshell looking flakes. So that's what I'm looking for. That's thinning out that area and knocking off a nice flake, so that my next flake is going to come off easy as well. So I'll do one of those, and then I'll remove a little material, but I don't want to dull it down too much. I want to keep it from getting too dull, so I can still flake it on the next one. Right, so now I'm going to do the same on this other side. Make sure I can get a nice bite. Get that nice clamshell. But the trick here is to make sure that you don't get to a spot where you can't knock another flake off. So now I'm ready to flip that and do the same again. And here's a nice pop. Get that clamshell looking flake. Move a little more material and then go to the next side. So I'll just continue working up into that point. Again, like I said, at about a 45-degree angle until I get my notches about where I want them. Once I'm pretty happy with those notches, I'm actually going to take and just kind of abrade with this notching tool and kind of dull down those edges. So I was being really careful not to dull down the edges so I can continue flaking and getting these notches deeper. But once I'm happy with them, now I want to be careful not to break off the ears or anything, but I'm going to just kind of dull that down. So once I wrap my sinew, it doesn't cut my sinew and it's not too sharp. And then from there, normally I'll come back and clean this base up a little bit and just make it look a little prettier. So I'll kind of straighten that up. Just for aesthetics. Maybe something about like that. And now at this point, I want to really sharpen these edges up, make it nice and sharp. So to do that, I'll take this notching tool. Now I'm just going to work down the edge and just gently push in. I'm not really trying to knock a large flake off, but I'll gently push in, and then I'll move maybe a 16th or a 32nd, not much, and just go all the way down there and create little serrations. So I'm going to adjust the angle here so you guys can see this better. So I'll just work down one edge, and I'm just gently knocking tiny little flakes off to create those serrations. So I'm not really trying to remove much material. And then once I get to the tip of this, I'm going to be really careful not to break that tip. Just little micro serrations. And again, really easy on the tip there. All right, so once we're done, we should have something along the lines of this. Some nice little corner notches, those really even, symmetrical, streamlined edges, and then those little micro serrations running down each edge. So this thing isn't super incredibly thin, but it is nice and straight, and that's what we want. We don't want any kind of serious curvature in this point. So it's streamlined, it's flat, and it's going to do a really great job of taking a deer this fall.